Well, hey, Bible Love listeners, so glad you're here with us for our special series with writers. And as always, we are going to start with a prayer from the Book of Common Prayer for joy in God's creation. So the Lord be with you. O Heavenly Father, who has filled the world with beauty, open our eyes to behold thy grace in all our works, that rejoicing in your whole creation, we may learn to serve you with gladness. For the sake of him, through all things were made, your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. So, listeners, you're in for this super special treat. I got to give you just a little bit of background to this. So, David Magee is with us, and I read his amazing book, Dear William, last summer, I think in about 24 hours. I was so enthralled with his story and with his faith and the way God has used him. So I just reached out to him, and we actually have a lot of friends in common, and just said, hey, would you do this? And he said, yes, I can't wait to talk to you. So David, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, I appreciate, when you put yourself out there writing a memoir like Dear William, where you're pushing yourself to a new level of vulnerability. I'll be honest too, it's humbling and it means so much to have someone like you, kind of give that endorsement back.
Absolutely. Well, so let's start with Dear William, and then we're going to talk about your new project that's coming out. But tell our listeners, in case they don't know you, and I know it's a big story, but a little bit about what's
Yeah.
happened in your life.
Yeah. So first I'll say that there literally is a God's work with my project, my book, Dear William, because there's something happening so much bigger than myself and so much bigger than me as a writer. It is like a small, powerful book that is leading. I mean, we're doing work like we created the William Magee Institute for Student Wellbeing at the University of Mississippi, and we got a federal grant for schools education, looking into new curriculum, joy-based curriculum. I'm speaking at schools throughout the country now, really because of that. And I'll kind of tell you about how that happened, which is, we lost a son, our oldest child, William, to an accidental drug overdose. And, when I found him, I'm there just on my knees sobbing. And, he had so much promise, honors college student. He was hoping to go to law school. He was such a sweet, precious child, young man. And but I'm on my knees asking the question of what happened? How did this happen? Because I knew it was bigger than what happened just in losing our son, because my whole family had been on a journey. I'd had my own journey in addiction. My wife and I had gotten divorced and remarried, had a daughter battling eating disorder, nearly lost another son who was found essentially dead at a fraternity house and who came back to life in a miracle and found sobriety. But it was like something bigger happened here. So initially, when people hear about Dear William, they think, oh, he's written this book about losing his son. But I will wrap all of that up and say, really, I was called to write something bigger. Dear William is about the making and near breaking and ultimate recovery of an American family. We lost our
Yeah.
son, William, but I tell everybody, don't feel sorry for me. We found great joy in recovery, and we miss him every day. But really, it's a process of the circle of life, and we've just kind of
Right.
had to make peace with that and find our way to move forward.
Yeah. So David, let me ask this because I know you're a person of faith, and I feel funny when I ask this question, but I think you're okay with this. So when tragic things happen in
Yeah,
our life, when we're overwhelmed with grief, I'm not the kind of person that thinks God said this was going to happen to
that's
William or
right.
this was going to, of course not. But I think it's what we do in that grief, and it's
Yes.
how we process that. And I think that's one of the things I admire about you and your family is that you are sharing your grief with the world, but you're also sharing hope with the world. And how can we make this better for other students, like with
Yeah.
the center at Ole Miss, like all the things? How can we make this better for those that might be going down this path? So don't you think God helps us find the blessings in
Yes.
tragedy?
Yes, that's such a great point and a wonderful question. I'm positive of the sense of one of the greatest gifts of faith is the strength that God gives us for resilience.
Yeah.
And conversely, it fits so well together because one of the greatest keys to human joy is resilience.
Yeah.
And we would like to escape the negative feelings, even on small things. There's family there at Christmas, I'm uncomfortable. A big tragedy, I don't want to get out of the bed. I've lost my son. Faith gives us the resilience to kind of work through that and be able to, if we need counseling, the courage to get counseling. If we need to address the family holiday or the crisis, how am I going to surround myself with the support and get myself what I need to get through this? Faith gives us that strength. And when we learn that resilience to navigate, so it's the same way for a student that maybe goes off to college and is battling loneliness, or in high school and they're working hard but they're having a hard class and they'd like to get away from it. The resilience that we learn how to navigate those is often the keys to how we find joy later. And that's how
Yeah.
it's been for our family. So we've been able to take our story and, I share it in schools and college campuses, and I relate to students. And I don't think that our experience of extreme is any different, I tell students, than what they are facing in maybe smaller challenges or within
Sure.
their own family, because it can feel so hard, and it
Yeah.
can feel so overwhelming, and it's real. So that's really why we share our story. I mean, what I really learned was the value in our family and the value of resilience. It's not easy, and we'd like the discomfort to go away, but learning to manage that and manage those feelings and get the support we need to get through it is really what unlocks joy. And our loss helped us find great joy. And that's kind of a painful thing for me to say,
I can
because it can
imagine.
be misconstrued, but it
I
did.
can totally imagine because I don't want this for your family. I wish
Right.
William was running around in
Oh,
here and living his life. I don't want
yeah.
that for your family. But I think it's what you've done with this that makes the difference. And I know William is very proud. I know
Oh,
he is. So here's my next question. So you've got a new book is
yeah.
coming out, and you said it's sort of an
Yeah.
extension of the
Yeah.
story. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so this September, a sequel memoir. So it's a sequel to Dear William. It's called A Little Crazy, and it's more about the underlying issues of ADHD, anxiety, depression. A lot of nearly 25% of America, just in America, some 25% of the populace battles what are called mild mental health issues.
Right.
They're not at the extremes, and they're the ones that we have to live with and work with in our families and jobs and careers. The issue about these so-called mild mental health issues is that they can either combine together, or when we're in periods of extreme stress or other things going on in our life, they can rise up to be extremely debilitating. And so what's beautiful though is they're like all of the strengths and weaknesses we have as humans. What's often our weakness, right, is often our strength. What I learned is that if we can learn to honestly assess these so-called weaknesses, and there are tools to manage them, and we can be honest and address them, we can actually turn them into assets,
Sure.
and powerful assets. And so
Yeah.
for me in my life, that kind of some of the adversity that I faced, it's no different than what others have faced. I don't think I'm special, but it was mine. And so I had to learn what to do with it. And really, I didn't even know I was a missionary in the faith world, but I kind of crawled to that because God changed and saved my life. And so much of my forthcoming book, A Little Crazy, is about one man's journey. Me as a man facing what I face, maybe no different than anybody else, I'm sure, and how faith kind of guided me, no, not kind of, did guide me through this and helping me find myself and find the strength to address and kind of navigate this world. And
Mm,
it is the book is literally a little crazy sometimes. There's a moment where my wife had divorced me, and like that's all in Dear William. But we're coming back together. I've gotten ahead of my addiction. I've acknowledged my issues of infidelity, and I want my wife back. She's who I always wanted. I didn't mean to ruin that. That was my illness getting in the way.
hmm.
So I'm back to her on my knees, and I've come through a religious experience, and really for the first time, and it's very powerful. And she sees a change in me, but I'm also talking a little crazy. I'm telling, she's like, but you've kind of, your career is in disarray. What are you going to do? And I was like, well, I'm going to write contemporary books, contemporary scripture for healing, for families. And she's like, but your family's barely talking to you. We just got divorced. You haven't
Right.
been going to church lately. Are you okay? And of course, here we are. I actually do write those books. I told her I was going to be in a big role of helping others. And at that time I was unemployed. I mean, that's what God told me. And I didn't even know what to do with it, but kind of speak the truth. And so this book, A Little Crazy, is about that journey, about where we started there, and actually how I saw it through over a decade to
Mm.
where I'm fulfilling that calling.
Well, first of all, I believe everybody is a minister. You
Oh,
don't
no
have to
doubt.
be an ordained person like me. In
Yes.
fact, in the Episcopal Church, one of the things that I love is that we say the lay people first and bishops, priests, and deacons last.
I love that.
So I mean, I agree with that so wholeheartedly. I also, the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, Michael Curry, he wrote a book called Crazy Christians. And it feels very similar in the same way that like God gives us these things inside of us, and we have to be a little crazy to voice
Yes.
them and be vulnerable to what may come out of that, you know? And so I don't think of you just as a writer. I think of you as a minister because you are sharing what hurt you and the troubles you went through so that other people can understand they're not alone and that
Mm.
there are blessings. I think part of the world is really hurt in a lot of ways, and we don't know
Oh
how to
gosh.
do that. You know, this is not a secret about myself. I'm just not sure I've ever said it on the podcast, but I talk about it a lot. But I struggle with anxiety, and it is more of like a minor health issue, as you said, but it doesn't matter if it was a minor health issue or a
Right.
major health issue, like just to know that there are other people that
Yes.
feel that. And I think it's actually helped me be a better minister because when people come to me and say that, I'm actually can be vulnerable too, just like you are, and
Right.
say, oh, I struggle with this. I have to take medicine. I have to breathe in bags
Yes.
sometimes, you know,
Yes.
whatever it is. And so I think that's what God calls us to do. It's
Yes.
not about how much money you make. It's not, I
That's
mean, we
right.
all need to survive and all of that, but it's like, how do we use the gifts and talents God has given us to help others? You know, Christianity is actually pretty easy. Love God, love your neighbor.
Mm.
We screw that up a lot.
Yeah.
But if we're always intentional about that, and you're doing that, and I'm doing that, I think God can be nothing but pleased, you know, even in our
Yeah.
mistakes.
And you know
So,
what's so beautiful about that is I've been able to dig in kind of as a layperson on the student and family mental health
mm-hmm,
spectrum so much, like through this institute we've started. And you know what's interesting on that note is you're what you're speaking is a fundamental truth of faith. But here's what's even more beautiful that I've learned from a factual research perspective on this earth of what we can see and get our hands on, actually believing in something bigger than ourselves and engaging with one another
yes,
is one of the very key foundations of joy, of
absolutely.
how we humans get joy. And so what's beautiful is that's such a basic foundation of Christianity. What's also, I tell people, if you have your trouble getting your arms around that, you can actually just go look to the mental health studies of how humans find joy, and people in those factors, when they're engaging with God and when they're engaging with others, are consistently happier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When we get out of ourselves and we think about others and we give all of that. Well, that leads into another question. I didn't prepare you for this one, but I think you'll be okay. So before you wrote Dear William,
Yeah.
you obviously needed to speak to your wife and your son and your
Yeah.
daughter.
Wow. Yeah.
What was that like? Like saying, "Hey, I want to tell the world our story."
Yeah.
How did they respond? Obviously, they said,
Yeah,
"Okay." Did
no,
you
that's such a
book?
great question because I'll tell you something interesting about Dear William. At the night we had a launch on the publication day on November 2nd, 2021 at the Ford Center at the University of Mississippi. We were just blown away because there were like 800 people there, and my
Wow.
family joined me on the stage for a discussion about what we'd faced. We had an empty stool for our William, who we'd lost, and they blew me away of how vulnerable they were. And they're not speakers like me. They don't,
Mm-hmm.
well, they are. I mean, I think they're more powerful, but they don't, that's not what they do on a regular basis. And it really spoke volumes. And after that, I went searching around. I was curious, like, because there's been a bunch of books written about mental health and addiction, but the issue is, I couldn't find anybody, any other family in the country that had taken a stage like that and allowed their story to be told. The
Wow.
reason is because the family is rarely, that has been devastated like that, is rarely in recovery, arriving at the same time, that they are
Oh,
okay with it. I mean,
yeah.
I went 40 pages deep in Google. It's not been, you can't find that
How
except,
interesting.
yes. The deal was our family kind of did this individually and collectively together. And so what happened is I went to them to answer your question. I said, look, I think William had wanted me. I was with him the week before he died, and he was like wanting me, encouraging me to go write my book, even though I didn't know what that was, and tell our story one day when it was time. So I went to them and said, look, I think it's time, but I can't do this without your blessing because you're still alive. You're still here. We're all here together. And my wife first, but also my son Hudson and my daughter Mary Hallie said, you know what? We're it will be a little uncomfortable, but we're strong enough for that. And you need to go all the way. You need to
Awesome.
reach all the way down in here. And I would have coffee in the morning with my wife, who's incredible strength and strong person. And she would look at me and say, David, remember, you need to reach down here. And
Yeah.
she probably pushed me more than anything. And it allowed our family to really take the stage, so to speak, and tell our story in a different ways. And I heard things on that stage from my family, my children in particular, I'd never heard before.
Really.
They got the opportunity. I was like, wow, you
Yeah.
know.
Because the book, I mean, and everybody go buy this book and read it. And we're going to
No,
link
thank
all
you.
that stuff. But the book is a lot about William,
Yeah.
but it also talks about your marriage. It talks
Yes.
about the eating disorder. It talks about the other
Yeah.
drug addiction. It talks a lot. I mean, so it's really their personal stories too.
Oh, very
So,
much so. Their
mhm,
vulnerability, they allowed me to share for them. And then it's interesting. One little thing I say that just struck me about that, because it's a memoir, so it's my voice, my
right,
perspective. All their stories are anchored off mine, and I'm a
right.
man trying to make sense of. I meant to be a great father. I meant to be a great husband. I meant to be a great professional that had an impact on the world, and I've ended up in failing at all of those, and I feel
Mm.
bad about myself. And I'm trying to find my way through it. It's interesting. Do you know who the book has had nice success? Do you know who my primary readers are?
Who's that?
Women.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm,
that makes sense. I was gonna say it, but I didn't want to be wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah,
makes
I knew you
sense.
would know. And it's interesting. I've had people say, "Wow, you're a man writing from a vulnerable position." It seems like men would come to you kind of the same way. Women went to Glennon Doyle or this or
Yeah,
that.
right.
And I think that's true. And I still hold hope. I think we have a Dear William movie coming, and maybe I'll still reach that male
Oh, how
audience.
exciting.
I know, so exciting. Tap into that vulnerability. But I think the reason, honestly, so many women on a first level have responded to it is but and I say this to any men listening, is it's refreshing. I've had so many women come to say, like, I know it's hard for men to be vulnerable. I know it's hard
Yes.
because we were all reared in a manner of grit and grin and bear it and just, I'm fine, poke our chest out and we got it. But we
Right.
don't always have it. We don't always have it. And that's okay.
Well, that's one of the things I really love. Like, I would love to hear your wife's perspective and your children's perspective, but I also love that it's from your voice in the fact that there aren't a lot of men. I shouldn't generalize that, but it's harder for men to be that
Well,
vulnerable,
certainly on the publishing level, there's less published in that
Yeah,
regard, for sure.
exactly. So there was a God wink, that's what I call it, in this story that I just would be remiss if I did not bring up. So we haven't really talked about this, but if you read the book, you will understand David was adopted and met his biological family. But one of the ways you met them was at your daughter's wedding,
Yeah.
right? Talk about that.
It,
Like, to me,
it's
like such a
crazy.
powerful God moment to me. I was like,
Uh,
it blew my mind.
So I'd been, as a lot of adopted children, and look, anybody listening is adopted or has adopted children. Adoption is a very beautiful thing. I've helped
Yes,
many friends. That doesn't mean something real doesn't take place. It does in that transfer. It's a lot of adopted questions. I had questions about me. Who am I? And I grew
sure.
up in the era where the records were locked away and changed and
Right, right.
pretended like they didn't even exist. They like it wasn't true. My birth certificate said certificate of live birth. This woman who was not my mother gave birth to me at this time in that hospital, which actually was not true.
Mm-hmm.
I had issues around that, and like anybody would, I guess, and had looked for birth family, and then finally had kind of given up. Well, lo and behold, my daughter had always gone to Camp DeSoto and Camp Alpine. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
camps a lot of listeners will know in Mentone,
Mm-hmm.
Alabama. And as my boys had gone to Alpine, and my daughter had become the camp, the nanny for the camp director's children who were small at
Mm-hmm.
the time at Alpine Camp for Boys one summer. And she's keeping the girls, and she gets really sick, and there's a camp doctor there at the time who heard she was sick, goes over to see her. He's holding her hair back as she throws up into the toilet. He gets her some anti-nausea medicine. He keeps checking on her, and they bond.
Mm-hmm.
And the same year she gets engaged, and I guess the next year has a wedding and invites this doctor to her wedding, and he comes. He lives 6 hours away, and
That's
the camp was
awesome.
5 hours in North
They
Alabama.
really
He lived in
bonded over
Louisiana.
throwing up that he
Yeah.
wanted to come to her wedding. I love it.
And he came and brings his 6 children, and we're like, that's incredible. This doctor came from 5 hours away in Louisiana, brought his children. We don't really even know him. 6 months later, through DNA testing, we figure out that was my half brother who I never knew,
Unbelievable.
Tim Lindsay. And the summer before, she was a counselor at the Sister Girls Christian Camp, and was homesick, and had called me and said, I can't do this. I need to work with small children. They ended up pairing her at the dinner table with this, what she called a second grader. She writes a letter home 2 weeks later and says, well, it's unbelievable. I've bonded with this little, her name is Kitty. And we're like, oh, that's so sweet. Everything's
Mm-hmm.
great. Well, guess what? That was her niece, because that was Tim Lindsay's daughter.
Unbelievable.
It's a miracle, and now they're in my life every day, and
I know.
it's
I love
just
it.
incredible.
I
It's
know.
incredible.
And I just felt when I read that, I was just like, if there is not a God, like, I don't know what people are
I'm here to
thinking,
tell you.
because this is just
That's right.
amazing. And the way it was supposed to be.
The
And
way it was
now you
supposed to
all
be.
have this beautiful relationship. And there's a lot, like, you can go Google David and see all of his press stuff. And there's a lot out there. And It's all amazing. And it feels like there's no
Thank
bitterness
you.
there. Like it's just like so happy that everybody's together. And
We
so
are just so joyful and thankful, and we've suffered great loss, but that loss, as any listener knows who has suffered the same thing, it shapes who we are on this earth. And I'm a believer, like, I can't touch my son William tangibly, but he's still with me. I think that our
absolutely.
dearly departed ones, if we allow them, they will be with us. I still have conversations with him, and that's a little crazy too, I
No,
guess.
I love it. I think it's important.
It's beautiful.
David, you are a minister. You bring joy to the world. I am honored to know you, and I look forward to having ice cream at Hudson's place of
Deal.
business. And I just want to thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing your story and for loving God's people enough to like be vulnerable and say, you all need to know this and your family. It means more than you know.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
listeners, as always, remember that we love you, but most importantly, God does.